federally, federal agencies focused on minority businesses around this country, which includes our tribal brothers and sisters. This agency has a long history of focusing on the least of our pound but not always have we been a federal agency. I like to tell folks that we are 55 years old in 3 years. We were formally codified as a federal agency under the Harris administration just 4 years ago now. Um, and under that authority, we have a responsibility to reach now 11 million minority business enterprises across the United States, which are generating over $1.9 trillion of revenue. We have a responsibility as an agency and as a country to bring all of our cultures and communities into the broader tapestry of economic growth and competitiveness. And that's our responsibility. That's my responsibility every day that I work in this space. But I know that I'm not the only one engaging in this space. There's so many businesses and entrepreneurs that are focused on our success. But beyond the business and entrepreneurs, we're thankful to have a broad network of operators that exist across the United States. These operators are existing likely in many of your homes, in your home communities, for those who are tuning in, but I know that they exist in tribal lands as well. We're fortunate to have 13 tribal centers across the United States that are focusing on the needs, the unique needs of tribal country. We have a lot more that we will be doing, a lot more that I'm set to do, and this agency is set to do during our time. And I'm so thankful for the amazing career staff and team members who are continuing to focus on that body of work. But I'm most interested in having this conversation during this month, but every month and every day going forward, about how we can lift our tribal communities up, how we can pull them more focusedly into the boundless opportunities that exist within this country, and ensure that they're able to meet their full potential, and we can reach our goal and our target, which is wealth creation. Wealth creation for the minority business entrepreneurs in this country, the tribal communities in our country, so that we can close in a significant gap, a gap of over $7 trillion, over 1/3 of the GDP output of our country, so that they can realize their full potential, we can realize our full potential, and our country can truly thrive. So with that, I'd like to, again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. And I'll start with just a question that I know to be true for so many tribal communities and businesses around the country. Marina, tribal businesses and venture firms often face unique challenges in accessing capital. Can you share what you see as the primary barrier that they?
This is a broad question. There's so many challenges. So in terms of tribal VC, the numbers on that are so low in terms of both from tribal investment funds, the exposure to VC as an asset class, as well as tribal members receiving investments from VC. The numbers are, less than 1/10% of all investable venture capital in the market had gone to Native American founders, and consistently, it's never been, even 1/10%. So. The barriers to VC are that we do not have it as an asset class collectively, and we do not have access to it as an asset class in a collective way. So we are essentially economically excluded from the innovation economy in a very serious way at this time that is remediable. And it's something that, we can support and encourage the participation of both tribal nations and tribal members separately, because there is a huge opportunity for tribal businesses that are owned by tribes participating in the space, in addition to tribal member-driven businesses. I would say, in addition to that, it's the different types of sophisticated capital, whether it's private equity, anything that's outside of debt-facing capital is not coming into our nations in as direct a way as it should be. We make incredible partners to the U.S. economy in so many ways. We are the primary drivers of rural economic development in the nation. And, that $7 trillion of GDP that you mentioned, it's not only it affects us, it affects our neighbors, it affects a number of groups of people here that we all should be experiencing that increased prosperity. So I look forward to new ways to access capital being brought into our communities through conversations such as this, and through new programs that we can introduce in partnership with government.
I think that's so insightful. I know that the constraint for capital within our country is not it's not bound only to tribal country. It's the largest binding constraint for minority business entrepreneurs broadly. The ability for these businesses to grow and scale at pace to close that gap hinges in many ways on capital access and the diverse streams of capital that could potentially flow into their firm so that they can grow and scale at the pace that they choose to grow at. I know something for the Minority Business Development Agency is our Capital Readiness Program, which we are very fortunate to steward along with the Treasury Department. Treasury provided us $10 billion as a country to support small businesses across the United States. We were fortunate to have 43 technical assistance programs across the United States to help in the way of accessing that $10 billion capital fund. That's one way that MBDA is striving to address this problem set. I know we have our business centers, our equities around the system, including those 13 in tribal communities. But I'm curious to know from you, what more can we be doing? What more can MBDA be doing? What more can the federal government be doing to support the capital needs of our tribal communities?
So one thing that I think would be incredibly helpful is I was fortunate at the NMSDC annual conference in Atlanta to join a program in partnership with Barclays that you had all done a pilot with to help minority business enterprises gain increased access to capital through partnered venture funds and investors. And I think increasing programs such as that is a critical need for all of our communities of color in the United States. Particularly within Indian country, there needs to be exposure to tribal investment funds. There are sovereign wealth funds, there are direct investment funds, there are funds of funds. In terms of what's possible in that type of deal flow, we don't always have access to some of the things that you guys have access to, and I think that is a crucial intersection. I would say, in addition to that, really, a lot of these CDFI programs are wonderful and meet critical needs, but when it comes to high growth, high potential businesses, if certain types of debt are taken on or loan capital, it can stop or slow the growth of that business because it might be the wrong type of capital for that type of business. And so education on the different types of capital for different types of businesses, I think, is also a critical need at that stage, as well as understanding different corporate structures. VC has a pretty standard blueprint for what makes an investable company, and we don't have that knowledge set within our communities yet. I think it is an easy addition to some of the programs that you have, and really understanding, I would say, other forms of private equity, et cetera. And then I think on the tribal level and in terms of tribal governance, there can be support for our financial officers and financial enterprises in terms of expanding the types of capital that they decide to employ.
I think you've hit it right on the head. I've traveled around the country, and I know that my predecessors and my colleagues travel around the country having these conversations with businesses, entrepreneurs, MBEs, and it's a similar conversation. Most of it is an education conversation. Is VC right? What is VC? What does the space look like for us? We're fortunate to have our capital readiness program focusing on this category of work, but much of it is an education campaign. Like, what does that look like for us? What does that mean to us? Like, I can't tell you how many times over the last few months I've heard, the only thing I've heard about VC has been through Fearless Fund. That's what I've heard about VC. And there's a lot of the conversation that needs to be had with our communities around how we can leverage these funds, how can we leverage this capital streams to better our desire to grow and scale our businesses. And the truth is, there's not as you've noted, there's no one size fits all. Sometimes it makes sense for folks, and sometimes it doesn't. And we've got to have those conversations in a transparent and honest way. But you've been having this conversation in a really novel way and thinking about things differently. I think about Endemic Ventures and how you've been talking about and engaging around climate tech and the evolving landscape of tribal gaming. And I'm so curious about how you've been having this conversation, how you've been kind of pulling the threads together in a way that is evolving the space.
Thank you for asking that question. I am so excited to speak on these topics. I think in terms of looking at what's possible in both climate capital, nature-based capital, regenerative finance, and climate innovation, Indigenous peoples are 100% a necessary and critical driver of that type of innovation. We outperform in terms of environmental stewardship, biodiversity retention, and environmental management than the non-Indigenous identifiable population by over 400%. We perform that without access to additional resources and without access to frontier technologies. So if we are serious about climate crisis and natural disaster prevention, we have to engage Indigenous leadership in our innovation strategies. And so for me, that type of investment, especially under cultural guidance from our group of advisors for our fund, that we are very fortunate to be in strong relationships with, is really a necessary, important next step for all of humanity. In terms of our tribal gaming enterprises, it is incredible what the Indian Gaming Association has been able to do for tribal economies, and it is a primary point of so many tribes' economies at this time. I believe the number was 274 of the 272 of the 574 Native sovereign nations have gaming as a primary point of their tribal economies. And you know what's next for us that I see is that, look, the global economy is flat and accessible by anyone who has internet infrastructure, which we don't always have competently in our tribes. And that's something that we need to continuously invest in, and we need support and partnership in that. But as we are moving forward, one of the things that is really critical and that gaming has supplied is that our critical infrastructure, since we don't have tax bases, is paid for by those revenues. So moving that into a digital economy that can participate in the global economy as a partnership to U.S. innovation is unlimited potentials for both Native sovereign nations and the United States. It is a tribe by tribe differentiation in that every regulatory environment can be different. Every tribal government will want a different strategy, or may want a different strategy. But for us, gaming leads the way to the ability to stay in place and have higher wage rates, to have community ownership, and to have tribal member-driven innovation that can be supported by our gaming enterprises in novel new ways that are just exceptional opportunities in business.
I think you've hit on so many things that are so important to the conversation that we're having as a country. As we think about climate and we think about before coming over here, I was looking at a newscast that showed an unprecedented storm moving through the west of the United States. We're very fortunate as an agency to live inside of a department that includes NOAA and the National Weather Service, and the science is pretty on target on where we are as a country and the need to be more thoughtful about how we treat the climate, how we treat this planet that we're living in, how we treat this environment, and the ability for us to think of it as a part of us. Right? You've thought about, and you've thought about in the context of the ability for a tribal country and been able to demonstrate how tribal communities around this country have been able to leverage it and leverage the work that can be leveraged from the climate that we're the resource that we have as a country in a thoughtful way that drives economic growth. And that's the conversation that we need to be having all the time throughout every line and lever of the leadership apparatus of our country. So thank you for lifting up that leadership within tribal communities. But I'm sure there's a lot more that we can be about more creatively, other areas of innovation that we should be leveraging, particularly within tribal communities. To your point, these are sovereign lands that have a lot in the way of opportunity that exists there. And I assume that there are things that folks are not always witting of, not always cognizant of, and not always thinking about of ways to leverage some level of innovation and ingenuity.
So there are so many exciting projects that are tested in partnership with tribes that are, explored within tribal lands and also additionally led by tribes in blockchain and digital currencies, in a variety of hardware innovations and new energy innovations. It is really exceptional, the things that are quietly under the radar, but we could have this at volume. And at volume, and the engagement with tribal members and tribal youth and next generations, that innovation economy becomes very primary to that tribal income, to the collective needs of the community as well. So it's that can be grown and expanded. And I think that there is a space, a little bit beyond education, for seeding some of these innovations with potentially with some federal dollars or for matching capital, for encouraging a positive environment for tribally owned venture capital arms of tribal finance enterprises. But in addition to that, even operating tribal lands, and we had discussed some challenges that are we are partners in national security, and understanding like some tribes have a lot of land or coastline that is not observable, because there's just not enough human capital there. And so looking at drone opportunities for exploration of and observation of some of these spaces, or helping with the forest fires that are ravaging areas of our nation that also come into tribal lands. And we also have to be able to handle that collectively as well. So I think that there are a number of new opportunities that we can continue to explore. And I'm really looking forward to more of these conversations in Indian country, as our youth are really, really interested in innovation, and they are excited and active users of technologies and participants in STEM education. So our next generations really need these capital access opportunities and entrepreneurial opportunities opened up, for them to be able to fully participate in this type of economy.
That's completely fair, and I think it's more than fair. It's essential. You noted that so many tribal communities don't have access to reliable high-speed internet. I know that's been a focus of this administration. I know that there are designated funding streams set against this effort, and that's how we unleash the full breadth and volume of tribal communities, but also the entire country. The like we had a session yesterday within the White House where we talked about innovation and the fact that the youth of this country are the future. But the ability to innovate it hinges on certain critical needs, and among those critical needs is reliable high-speed internet. And if we don't have reliable high-speed internet throughout this country, and if we don't have it at an affordable rate, in an accessible way, then we are hamstringing ourselves against the true national security challenges that we face as a country, because what's on the horizon is an innovative, more digital footprint. And to your point, the young of our country, but the old alike, are relying on this innovation to carry us forward. Um, and you know this, your background in Web3, cybersecurity, and digital assets and discussing how we can boost technology to support economic self-sufficiency and resilience has been something that I found really heartening for tribal communities. But to your point, it's something to the point that you've raised earlier. It's something that is scalable across not only MBEs but the broader economy. And I would love for you to speak a little bit to that.
Sure. So in terms of those specific types of innovations, I think there are inherent and necessary partnerships, between anything that is operating in tribal lands and the rest of the U.S. innovation economy. We do not have a dearth of talent in Indian country. There are exceptionally talented professionals, but specialized skill sets in Web3, AI, cybersecurity are fairly minimal. Like, and it's such a small community. I think we all know each other, and we see who is trying to lead these projects, who might not have complete access, and those who have found a niche that works. And we see we have cybersecurity folks who are at homeland and who are from the Pueblos, and we have neighboring tribes in the Southwest who are leading some of these conversations in a collective way in Indian country. So what is possible for us in terms of protecting our cultural intellectual property, our our communities in a separate way, and integrating within the broader cybersecurity landscape is really critical for the future of the U.S. And I will say we have reached out through a number of think tanks and thought leadership organizations from New America to Harvard. And we have not found, I think, adequate partners to support some of the larger scale development needs for those cybersecurity relationships, for the assertions of our digital sovereignty or cyber sovereignty. There are new conversations around it, but it's somewhat limited to data, and there are a full spectrum of rights that are inherent to Indigenous peoples as Native sovereign nations in cyberspace. And I think as we can explore that together and start to assert those rights, it not only becomes an economic opportunity, a cybersecurity cooperation opportunity, but the innovation potential as onshore partners to the US is absolutely unlimited.
That's insightful. I think it's important for us to understand the full range as a community, right? Like there are certain levels of 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 both sovereignty and kind of clarity that we need to offer to this space. And I think about this in the context of the work that we're doing right now within MBDA. We worked through a number of tribal consultations earlier this year to compete. I think we're working on developing the notice funding opportunity right now for tribal communities to compete for funding. And we think about this and think about ways that maybe that funding can go to a space that can help continue this level of exploration. We're also working right now on the Parent J. Mitchell grant funding, which will be open to all minority serving institutions, including tribal universities and colleges. And I think about what they could be doing to explore this space and explore this issue set for the communities that they're a part of. The ability for us to speak to something in some ways might not come from a Harvard, but it could come from from an indigenous university or a tribal university or a HBCU or someone who understands what it's like to be marginalized, and to delve into that work and to study that space and to create clarity around that space for the communities in which they come from. And I think that's the value of this body of work, but it's also the importance of you lifting it up so that it's made clear and in profile for exploration. And I'm so thankful for you and your work in this space and so many who are engaged in this body of work. What should Indigenous entrepreneurs and leaders know to successfully navigate and leverage these emerging technologies? Any key things that they should be focused in on or thinking about?
So this is something I think about all the time. And for us, some of the more specialized knowledge feels out of reach, but it's not. And there's never been more accessible education for some of these specialized spaces, whether it's looking for technical knowledge, trying to understand the markets around, AI, Web3, cybersecurity, all these emerging spaces that you had mentioned. But also in terms of finance and VC as an asset class, I am a big fan of the work of the National Venture Capital Association and Venture Forward and things that they do to continuously educate new and emerging fund managers. And I think that there are ways to develop new programs in support of, tribal fund managers and tribal members who are interested in going into this space. I always answer all of my messages when I have outreach. I send resources everywhere I can. But these things are not out of reach, and it's a few months of time, and it's a few months of time to get that specialized knowledge, and then we're there. And then there's no one in the market who can think through our challenges or solve our space and connect between where we are and where the market is better than people from our community. So I would say, don't be afraid of the higher level skill sets or the things that seem more complicated or out of reach. They are not.
I really appreciate that, and I also appreciate the fact that I know I'm throwing all these questions at you and saying, "Speak to Indian country and speak." The truth is, like, we're no panacea of knowledge. I do know that you're an expert in a lot of spaces and you're a wealth of knowledge. And I think some of this, I think to your point, is the ability for us to leverage the opportunities for knowledge gaining that are available to us. And it's hard. It's hard to pull ourselves away from business. I know for me and for like some likely you to pull ourselves away from family and other obligations of life that stop us from exploring more or to carve out time to do other things like this. But it seems like you think that it's worth the investment of time.
So, I think one of the other things that people outside of Indian country don't always see is that, folks who have traditional responsibilities in a community or governance responsibilities in the community have additional full-time jobs
Yeah.
in addition to working, in addition to, families and childcare, and hopefully some time for themselves and, growing as people. But the investment in the future of what's possible for our tribal nations in being able to create the types of communities that are, you know, continuously healthier, and our tribal members to be able to stay in place and not have to go to cities for these opportunities is something that's never been possible, and it's really critical to all of our future. The numbers for what came out in the investments in venture capital were $136 billion in 2023, and less than $1 billion of that went to people of color in general. And Indian country also has a significant amount of capital, investment capital, that is possible to unlock, that we can also participate in this as an asset class. 17% of every major endowment in the United States is on average allocated to VC, and that is the highest performing part of those portfolios. And if we don't have exposure to that, how much are we leaving on the table, and how much opportunity for our tribal youth, and also the perspectives of indigenous peoples within innovation, not taking cultural intellectual property into that space, because there is no ethical way to invest in that, no ethical way to bring something that is communally owned from past and future generations into that space. But the perspectives, yes, are lacking in the innovation economy, and it's really important to have indigenous ways of thinking in scientific innovation of the future, for all of us as a species.
That's exactly right. I think about this in the context, especially when we talk about endowments, about just the transparency within the space. And even in the VC space, we talked about the level of capital that exists in VC. That's reportable, right? Like, not everyone is being transparent. Not everyone is sharing that insight. Not every university, not every tax-exempt university in this country is sharing how they're spending, how they're engaging in this space. And I think, to me, that is an important step in ensuring, like, where you're putting your money as a university is a statement of your values. Like, how are you spending? How are you investing? Who's managing your money? What venture who are the folks, who are the fund managers? Having a level of insight is I welcome your thoughts on that.
Can I also say that some of those fund managers are actively investing against indigenous interests, because sometimes the skill sets in finance and the cultural sensitivity are not in the same person. And so, I think the more that we can participate in a direct way and have even a basic understanding of the industry to advise where we want our capital and innovation to go, I think is going to be very critical, especially innovating within some cultural boundaries. I think that there is incredible opportunity in us leading not only our own investments, but the ability of helping shape what the U.S. innovation economy can look like.
I think to that point, I'm so curious about your thoughts about pairing and teaming. I think about the ability for other marginalized groups, but other groups across this country to be working with, investing in, teaming and pairing with tribal country. This is I think, a true opportunity as we think about them being sovereign lands, but also leading in certain spaces and places, an ability for us to leverage each other in a creative way.
So another thing that I think is a huge asset in Indian country is a lot of people are mixed, right? So when we're talking about, different communities, all of those communities can be represented because Indian country is not fit neatly, in a DEI category because it is Native sovereign nations. So, I myself am Pueblo and Jewish, and I love the bridge that I represent between communities, and the ways that I'm able to engage with both of my communities. And so, in terms of pairing, I think it is very natural that we work with everyone. And Indian country very inherently understands that we are all related. And so there is something very beautiful to that. But in addition to that, looking at, the ways that there can be, overlapping sectors within the US, even from, our national labs, looking at, partnerships to tribally owned businesses. I will say I've had some beautiful conversations. I won't mention the individuals I've had them with, but from national labs, talking about, transferring some of that nationally funded innovation to tribally owned businesses, because we've never seen that before. And that, in terms of creating high growth, high potential companies, benefits all of us. And it's exciting to see where that U.S. innovation can go when we have those types of partnerships.
I think that you've hit something right on the head. And the ability for us to innovate is, and to leverage each other for that towards that innovation is critical to every part of the economy of this country. And especially as we think about the way that we can be pairing and teaming and to realize that level of innovation, like that's the future of America. We talk about this in the context within the department of our mission and our values. And that's something that we've literally changed the focus area of the department to focus around: innovation. Housed within the Department of Commerce's NIST, which is responsible for the Chips and Science Act and the AI platforms that work, but also MBDA that's able to work in partnership with them. And we also have the Economic Development Administration that is working to create ecosystems through the Build Back Better Regional Challenge and tech hubs. And we're all engaging in this space together to think creatively about pulling our country together around lines of innovation. But the sticky widget that I'm stuck with wrestling with most of my day and most of our time, and I think it's both of our sticky widgets. It's like pulling our communities along to realize the full bounds of that innovation, because we are often the communities that are not thought of first. But at least I can say in the spaces that I've been, this department, this administration has been squarely focused on centering our communities in the first part of the conversation. And usually for us, it's like, oh well, maybe we can get some of we can play cleanup on the back end. But this is the moment. This is the moment of innovation. This is the moment of change, and the moment of, I think, the most important word, opportunity. And this is why I think this conversation is so important to me and so many of those who are tuning in, is to seize the opportunity, right? The ability for us to be a part of the change and innovation that's happening within our economy, within our country, to make sure that you all are engaged in the change that our country is affording us right now, and to stake your claim in it. This is yours. These opportunities are yours if you are able to seize it, if you're willing to seize it, if you're able to grab this moment. I also respect that there are folks who might be tuned in, might have questions that are engaged with us. So I'll flag that for our team here. If there are any questions within the chat for us to work through. But while they formulate any questions and organize it for us, any policy suggestions that you have on how the United States government, others, could be better situated to support the needs, the diverse needs that exist within tribal communities.
So I think we have, as I mentioned, we have no lack of talent. We have no lack of innovators. I think Indigenous peoples were the original innovators. We're the original scientists. And, to not see that continuing in that leadership in the future, I think would be a disservice to all of us. So creating support opportunities that support Indigenous innovation directly, but specifically the types of funding that we need. We need support around venture capital, high growth capital access, and directed lines into in other investment vehicles within the United States. So any way that policy can support that direct access, I think, is going to be really critical, whether it's seeding some tribal VCs, which I think is possible, especially with our gaming tribes who can deploy and have that human capital on hand. And then also potentially matching capital opportunities. I think we can explore a lot together and with tribal leadership.
No, I appreciate this, and I know that I'm also kind of I'm also kind of seeding the ground for this because we're having a conversation with a capital expert to talk about something that is a core mission of MBDA, which is capital access. So I appreciate that response, mostly because I share in its importance and its intent, and the need for our lawmakers to focus in on those needs as they make critical spending decisions around it. With that, I know that our team, I think, has some questions to share, so I'll kick things over, I think, to our Deputy Chief of Staff, Curtis Doster.
Hi, just a couple of questions from the chat. I'll start with the first one. How can tribal nations protect their data sovereignty and ensure that their data is used ethically and responsibly?
So there are a lot of experts who have been exploring data sovereignty in particular. I believe with ASU, there is a center, and please, I apologize if it's University of Arizona, but it is in Arizona that a lot of these conversations are centered. But from Arizona to First Nations in Canada to Maori in New Zealand, data sovereignty is a very well discussed topic, and a lot of open research from Indigenous academics and experts. I will say, I think it is a small piece of the bundle of rights in cyberspace that tribes need to assert, both to protect tribal and cultural intellectual property in a collective way, as well as tribal members as tribal citizens. And in addition to that, tribal lands and the privacy of tribal lands. I think that in our pueblos in particular, there are some challenges around privacy with satellites and public availability of that in spaces that are not open to the general public. And asserting those rights not only protects those spaces and those sacred sites, but asserting those rights can also include economic and educational opportunities. It can create new healthcare opportunities when we have those rights as a bundle. And so we're not just worried about, the potential healthcare data leaks, but we have specific rights that are for tribal citizens in cyberspace.
I wish I had some unique legal insight. I don't have unique legal insight. I do know that we're very fortunate as a department to have amazing folks within the National Information Technology Administration, NTIA, that are experts in this space. I would, for those who are interested in how the federal government is thinking about this and engaged in this space, I would direct them to my agency colleague, NTIA. I'm sure Ellen Davidson would not want me opining absent his team's important insight. Any other questions that we have time for?
Yep, two more questions. The next one being, what are some promising examples of successful tribal-led businesses or technology initiatives that we can learn from?
So on the spot, that's a lot. So I would say, there are so many, especially around our gaming enterprises, and looking at, where they are moving into the future with, every talk that's coming out of our gaming enterprises has to do with AI and digital currencies right now, and what esports are available. And I think that some of these are incredibly exciting, but there are a number of, I'm trying to think of if some of these are not public, but there are a number of blockchains that have to do with carbon pricing and trading in native sovereign nations that are exciting. There are drone opportunities that are incredibly exciting. There are underwater technologies. We have the spectrum in Indian country. It's just those stories are not always making it to the general public, and things move a lot more quietly. for us sometimes.
I think that's fair, and I'd also direct that question to one of the amazing 13 business centers we have that have a dearth of experience around the successes of supporting those tribal businesses every single day. And my flag to that question to the person who wrote it is like, maybe you can be the next one that we support. Please connect with your local minority MBDA business center and one of our 13 if you're a member of the tribal community. To benefit and be one of those success stories. Our final question, if we have time for it.
Yes. The final question is, how can we foster greater collaboration between tribal communities and the broader tech and startup ecosystem?
This is exciting. I think we need to do a number of things. So we need some of these funds and, senior level executives speaking to tribal leaders directly. We are actually in the process of creating an event in Silicon Valley for this need, but there is a complete need in every innovation center in the US to be engaging tribal leadership, to be sharing with tribal leadership what the market is doing, what some of these returns are looking like, because it sounds made up to people who are not part of the innovation economy yet. And when we talk about how high performing some of these tech companies are and how lucrative some of these funds can be, it is really critical that they are consistently hearing from the market directly and subject matter expertise. And really looking at what those specific roadblocks are, and hearing them about what their communities need in terms of bringing in that the interested youth to be that next generation of innovators for those companies, for those communities, whether it's a big four tech company or a high performing startup in the market. We need direct engagement, and we're really not having as many of those conversations as we need to have. ACES is a great resource, and they have a lot of this, but we need a larger volume and we need a comprehensive engagement.
I think you've hit something right on the head. There's something about putting your body where your values are that makes a difference in every single conversation. I know that we are very fortunate to have the person that runs the RES conference as a part of our national network, as part of our network of agents of equities. We've got to show up. When I say we, I mean folks who are engaged in positions of responsibility need to show up. I'm very fortunate to have team members who show up, who are not a part of the organizing and planning of these spaces, but we need for these companies and others to physically show up and be a part of this conversation. I know we are out of time. I want to thank you for this conversation, and I also like to thank everyone who's tuning in. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation to create space for yourselves and this community that we are all invested in and their success. I'm so thankful for all of you. Please be on the lookout for all the notices of funding opportunities that we have on the horizon, including those going out to tribal communities around the country, as well as the minority serving institutions and other notice of funding opportunities. Be a part of this, be a part of the community within MBDA, but also make yourselves available to the free services that we offer. Create wealth for yourselves and your community and our country. Thank you again, and look forward to future engagements.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for this fireside chat with Endemic Venture Capital, Mrs. Marina Shihei, and Deputy Undersecretary Eric Morrissette with MBDA. Like I said, my name is Dylan Shihei, and I'm just sending you off with some blessings to you and yours, your family, for a safe and healthy remainder of the year and going into this next coming year. So stay strong. Have the strength to continue for you and your businesses as well. And just happy that you're here to join us and be informed on some of the opportunities and challenges that our tribal communities face. But try pa hopa, hoi ian eki shawia. Thank you.